That massacre last week in a Texan school turns out to have an horrific twist. 19 children and 2 teachers were shot dead by an 18-year-old gunman. But what we've now learned is that for 40 minutes, while desperate parents outside were stopped from trying to save their children, police inside the school refused to break into the classroom where the gunman and the children were. They refused to risk their lives charging in, even though some of the surviving children in that room were calling 911 for help. Now, one Republican congressman, Dan Crenshaw, a former Navy SEAL, was scathing.
Was clearly a scary scenario. They don't want to get shot, and so they don't do it, even though they've had the training that specifically says that you need to put their lives before your life. And the training specifically says in the manual that if you don't like that, you should find another career field. And the fact that that was not followed is heartbreaking.
Joining me is American-born political commentator James Morrow, now the Daily Telegraph's federal political editor and co-host of Outsiders on Sky News every Sunday. James, thank you so much for your time. This is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, armed police not wanting to risk their lives to save children in a massacre. What does that say?
Well, I mean, Andrew, if you sign up to become a police officer, carry a badge, carry a gun, have the right to use lethal force on behalf of the state to protect people, to protect the innocent. There's nobody more innocent than these little kids who are in this classroom that's getting shot up by this madman, and you refuse to go in, and your commanders. There was one lieutenant who was on TV the other day who said, oh, well, you have to understand, the American people have to understand, they could have been shot. Well, hello, that's your job. That's why you sign up to be a police officer. But there's another point to this, Andrew. Every time there is a huge, massive news event, a major tragedy, whatever it is, there's a fog of news. And very often people try and politically jump onto that. And, we saw all the people on the left, the Democrats, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, say, the whole solution to this whole thing, this would never happen if you had gun control. And there's a legitimate debate you can have about letting kids, 18-year-old people, buy AR-15s. Sure, we can have that. But, you cannot just say that if you've got police that aren't doing their job. And the final thing I'll say is the Border Patrol, who Joe Biden so maligns for their, terrible, evil job of keeping the southern border safe, they're the ones who rushed in and actually took down the killer.
Well, it's interesting, you just wonder whether Americans now are less united and not prepared to risk their lives as much as they once might have for the greater good. I mean, am I reading too much into one situation? But it does come after, well, let's not kid ourselves, after police have been demonised over the past couple of years, treated like trash in the media. You might think a number of officers might not want to risk their lives anymore.
Well, I mean, look, I can't speak to what was going on in the heads of these officers here. Not a lot, frankly, is the best I can guess. But the fact of the matter is that, the police have absolutely been demonized for the last few years. We saw that through the 2020 and the George Floyd riots. We've seen that with all the defund the police movements, which have been backed in by much of the major media and the Democrats, many major Democrats in the United States. I don't think heroism is necessarily dead. There are still heroes. There are heroes who stormed the classroom from the Border Patrol. There were parents who wanted to be heroes, but were held back and even in one case at least handcuffed by the cops and kept from saving their own children. So there are still heroes, but, there's a big push and, I don't want to make it political, but it is, I think, coming from the left to de-mythologize heroes, to take heroes down a peg, to say don't be heroic, and also, let's be really frank about it, to take down masculine virtues, which is what heroism in this sort of case ultimately, I think, in many cases is. Yes, there are heroic women, but, these masculine virtues of manliness and protection, have also been taken down by the left. So it's a very confused culture, and it's the same sickness that I think produces the shooting.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I do think there are too many guns in America. I do think it's too easy for some people to get them, like this troubled 18-year-old. What has he got? Why has he got a gun that is basically designed to shoot as many people as possible and as quick as possible? You don't need that. But anyway, for all that, in another sense, this tragedy was in part allowed to happen because other people were not prepared to use their guns. Now, let's leave these police to one side. They didn't go in. There's a lot of talk about toughening America's gun laws in response to this tragedy. Wouldn't a much easier solution have been to put an armed guard in these schools so that a guy like this couldn't come in without thinking he might actually get shot?
Look, there's lots of solutions. There's no easy one. That may be one of the solutions, armed guards. It's pretty grim to have to think about that, but, you know, that's the world we live in. But the other thing on gun, a lot of schools have got them. It's a grim reality. But the other grim reality is that the more police aren't seen to be doing their jobs, just as they were seen to be held back in the 2020 riots, the more ordinary law-abiding people are going to want to have their own weapons for protection. So it's an own goal for the gun-grabbing lobby, the anti-gun lobby, you know, to also have the police not protecting people, whether it's in civil insurrection, as it was in 2020, or in these horrendous cases such as we saw last week in Texas.
Absolutely true, James Morrow. If I was living in that town and I saw that massacre and that slack response by police, I'd want a gun. It's just pretty obvious to me. James Morrow, thank you for your time.